Oh, hey, sorry everybody for taking such a long time to upload since my last video. As you may or may not notice, I did just get done moving, which has been a whole ordeal, but I'm pretty glad that it's over. Kind of mixed feelings though, because I'm gonna have to redo residence permits, driver's licenses, so much stuff, because as it turns out, I may have moved to a different country. After 2 years of living in Finland, making an entire YouTube channel all about it, naming it after the country, it turns out that Finland doesn't exist. Or at least that's the theory. I, for one, was shocked. But before I decided to just pack it all in and fully lean into learning Mumi Svenska, I decided, hold on, let's buckle down, take a deep breath and get our bearings, and dive into this conspiracy head on. And what I learned was fascinating, but not for the conspiracy itself, more for what it has become and what it could be. And that's what I want to talk about today. Just who is behind this whole Finland isn't real conspiracy? What are the limits to a joke? And what makes any country real? What makes anything real?
Finland doesn't exist.
Media manipulation tactics that we haven't seen at this scale before.
Maybe it's more than a meme.
On maps, you'll see the country Finland, but if you really go there, it's not.
Everything is relative.
There is no country to the east of Sweden.
The greatest catastrophe of the 20th century.
We need to find out the truth. We do.
Wait, elaborate. What? This is traditionally where people think that Finland is.
Стран Запада всегда была лишь инструментом для сдерживания России.
It's an IKEA. We may have concrete proof.
It's just the ocean.
That's your Finland right there, boy. Talking about big fish?
Big fish.
The name of Finland is Finland. What's in the fucking name?
When it comes to Finland, we are not afraid, but we are well awake.
It's not funny anymore. Things are starting to get disturbing in Swedish. We were inside the store and we found meatballs.
So we have our special Russian truth.
Putin has constructed his own reality here.
Современная Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией.
The enemies of truth on the internet are going to use every tool at their disposal.
And if you're watching this and you're Finnish, I don't believe in you. I'm sorry. You're probably just a government spy.
Победа будет за нами!
Almost a decade ago, back in 2014, a Ask Reddit thread started by user Violently Average asked users, what's one thing that you were taught by your parents and assumed was completely normal, only until you realized it was not normal at all? The top-rated response was from a user going by the name Rarigan, who wrote, "My parents never believed in Finland. I grew up to never believe in Finland until I researched it further. It's a pretty heated topic in my family." After being asked about this further, he wrote a long explanation about how his parents thought it was all a conspiracy theory, loosely summarized as the following. Post-World War II, the nations of Japan and the USSR had a tense geopolitical relationship. However, as both of them were undergoing substantial social and political changes during this period, they decided to ally themselves over a shared interest: fishing. They decided that Japan would get special fishing rights off of Russia's western coast, but that Russia would in turn receive a percentage of all the fish caught in this region. Now, some of you may have bristled when I said that last bit, specifically the western coast of Russia. Isn't Russia primarily landlocked to the west? And the narrow stretches of the Baltic and Black Seas surely can't be profitable enough to be a substantial diplomatic bargaining chip, can they? Well, here is where Rarigan's theory takes a wild turn. According to Rarigan's theory, Finland is not only not a real country, it's not even a physical landmass. All that space between Russia and Sweden is apparently just vast, open, empty water. Well, except for all the fish that are apparently swimming there being fished out by the Japanese. The nation of Finland was simply made up, supposedly, by these two nations as a way to cover up their special arrangement quietly. They even argue that the Trans-Siberian Railroad was constructed specifically for this purpose, to transport the fish that were caught in the West all the way across Russia to its eastern ports, all under the guise of a fictional company called Nokia. I have another video that prominently features Nokia's actual history, however, so if that is something you're interested in, go ahead and check that out. Apparently, even though this started as a quiet arrangement between two nations, once the United Nations caught on to this made-up country, instead of blowing the whistle on the whole thing, they decided to play along. And over the course of the remainder of the 20th century, the fictional nation of Finland apparently became an idealistic placeholder for what nations should aspire to. Because no country could so consistently be ranked first in gender equality, healthcare, education, literacy rates, national stability, freedom of the press, and be the least corrupt government in the world. But before you start arguing with me about how ridiculous this is, wait! There's more! While the fictional landmass of Finland apparently does not exist, Finnish people do, because enough people live under the assumption that they live in this country that a Finnish culture has developed out of it. However, all of these so-called Finns don't actually live in Finland. They actually live in small towns in Western Russia, Northern Estonia, and, like those in the capital city, Helsinki, like me, in Eastern Sweden. All of this is apparently done by manipulating GPS and satellite imagery and using designated Finnish zones in the previously mentioned countries, also that the world governments can keep up appearances of the success of liberal social democracy. Yeah, Russia, famous for loving the success of liberal social democracy. You can see how ridiculous this is, and how quickly it could devolve into lizard people control the world via the New World Order mega shadow government anti-Semitic garbage. But rather than debunk all of these claims one by one, let's just cut to the chase and save ourselves some time. Finland exists as a culture, as a formally recognized state, and as a physical landmass. The real fiction bound up in all of this is actually much more interesting, and it's the conspiracy theory itself. In an interview with Vice from 2016, they identified Rarigan as a 22-year-old named Jack, who says he made the whole thing up. He says his parents actually do believe that Finland exists, but they get a pretty big kick out of the joke, while most responses, including many from Finns, amounted to "Mitä vittua?" It seems like most people got a pretty good laugh out of the joke. One user, Redditor PM Me Nice Messages, even went on shortly after to create the subreddit r/Finland Conspiracy. The subreddit took off most prominently between 2018 and 2020, going from around 4,000 followers to almost 40,000. It's pretty obviously a place to satirically lampoon other conspiracy theory-centric internet circles, similar to what birds aren't real people are doing. And it's pretty transparently a joke that most users are totally in on. I mean, one of the things they point to justify this whole thing is, what do fish have? Fins. Thus, Finland. The subreddit rules even explicitly ask people not to compare them to flat earthers or other conspiracy theorists. And while this might have the guise of trying to keep things on topic, I actually think it serves a different purpose, which is to prevent these discussions that are meant to be a joke from derailing into more dangerous areas like great replacement, blood libel, gay frog water stuff. But as Poe's law states, it is impossible to create an exaggeration of extreme views so exaggerated that those in the audience may not mistake it as sincere. And unfortunately, this was no exception. And that meant something, because just about a year ago, something happened that changed everything.
It was unprovoked.
Putin has just addressed the Russian people moments ago, announcing what Putin called the start of a military special operation, his words, to demilitarize Ukraine.
But this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine as the sun came up this morning.
On February 26, 2022, just 2 days after Russia began its special military operation and invaded eastern Ukraine, the r/Finland conspiracy founder and moderator PM Me Nice Messages posted the following message. This subreddit was made in a better time, when the legitimacy of Finland wasn't questioned. We will not allow it to become a troll farm for Russian bots to talk about how Finland doesn't exist. Myself and the other mod have received messages of solidarity from Russian accounts supporting us in our attempt to take down Finland. This subreddit is not about this. Any Russian mouthpieces found here propagating their mindless propaganda about Eastern Europe will be banned. Ever since that post went live, the subreddit has been locked, such that all posts have to be approved by moderators, which consist only of founder PM Me Nice Messages and Rarigan, or Jack. In the more than a year since this change, none have been approved. If you're like me, the first thing to pop into your head when you read this is, well, this seems a little extreme, kind of breaking kayfabe, if you will. But it's important to resist that impulse, because the responses tell a much different story, one of support, seriousness, and solidarity. Man, it's a crazy world we live in, where a meme subreddit that posts pictures of open ocean on a map going, LMFAO, what's a Finland, is now trying to be taken over by Hitler 2.0. Russia. Those bots. Finland is our conspiracy, not theirs. Go get 'em, mods. Russia's trying to gaslight everyone hard enough that no one knows what the truth is. Mass amounts of chaff to bury anything reputable. These sentiments actually make a lot of sense. What was once an outlet for dumb goofs could easily become a platform for deceptive and divisive rhetoric. And I think it's important that we understand how that could happen in order to prevent it in the future. To understand what the subreddit could be, it's important to understand what it originally was. A shitpost. Tom Nicholas has a great video where he talks about what shitposting is as an art form, and so I'll link to that in the description of this video below. He references the work of Tom Wyman, who defines shitposting as posting for the sake of posting, with a sort of indifference, both to quality and reception, both positive and negative. It celebrates the appearance of a lack of care or effort. While memes tend to emerge out of a format that people find funny or relatable on its face, shitposts emerge out of an incongruity with the expectations of communities or platforms. They're meant to confuse those who encounter them, but are generally done with a particularly playful tone. However, Nicholas delineates between this original mainstream understanding of shitposting, what he calls aimless shitposting, doing so for a playful upending of expectations, and what he calls disruptive shitposting. Referencing the writer Sean McEwen, he writes that disruptive shitposting is meant to interrupt or obstruct the discourse of others. It derails active discussion and sends threads off topic through low-quality posting, often using inflammatory, ironically falsifiable, provocative, or vulgar content.
If aimless shitposting might be seen as a game played within a consenting community, disruptive shitposting is a weapon which is turned by one community on another.
There might be laughs to be had from a disruptive shitpost, but they tend to be generally one-sided and a little bit less absurdist in their construction. And some shitposts may exist in a fluid space between these two categories, depending on context or timing. A big example of this was the 2016 US presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This was the time of peak Pepe's, Wojak, and Pokemon Go to the polls. But these blatantly disruptive shitposts made space for more sinister ones that didn't seem so shitty on their face, but rather just peddled ridiculous conspiracy theories. Think Pizzagate or QAnon. So why did this take off, concentrated in such a small amount of time? The emerging structures of platforms and the internet in general certainly did a lot of heavy lifting during this period, but there was an organization to how these shitposts were spread that was very different than ever before. We now have a lot of proof that an extensive decentralized infrastructure of online outlets, troll farms, and state-sponsored media organizations mobilized during this period to disrupt perceptions of the truth. These shitposts weren't just disrupting online discussions, though. We were so inundated with them that they began to bleed into the hyper-real world, and a huge amount of them had connections with Russia. Russia, like a lot of states, has a long history of propaganda, primarily coming from the Soviet period. However, the 21st century Putinian model is an entirely different animal. Soviet-era propaganda primarily tried to present alternate realities as truth, and used as many resources as it could to provide proof of these claims. But the modern-day propaganda of the Putin regime is way less concerned with truth. If Soviet propaganda was a series of arrows aimed at precise points to disrupt truth, Putin's is a wide spray of buckshot. Tons of disconnected and disparate pieces of information meant to shred and blast apart any semblance of what could be true. This actually started within Russia as a method of their domestic media. However, it soon spread beyond its borders. Rather than present a coherent and consistent alternate reality, this method seems to push as many incongruous, incoherent narratives as possible, all in an attempt to display how the West is going to come for Russians when the time comes. The Russian state is by no means alone in using mass media and information warfare in order to change the way we perceive the world. It would be foolish to argue that. But this new brand of weaponized postmodernism is different because, yes, the West has done some heinous imperialist colonial shit to the rest of the world. But this particular rhetorical instance is actually a smokescreen to obscure Putin's imperialist expansions and annexations that they've undertaken in the past decade. As Anya Turnbull says in one of her great videos,
their strategy isn't to prove that they are telling the truth, but to convince as many people as they can that the other side might be lying.
The model aims to present a view of the world in which the truth is relative, but not based on different meanings coming together, but rather maintaining a psychological wariness or skepticism. It's a decentralized but uniform, disruptive shitpost. It doesn't seek joy or play, but to derail discourse and make you go, well, hold on a minute, is that true? Just one thing I feel like I should note is that as a person who grew up in a period with a rapidly evolving internet and a modicum of media literacy, I do think that postmodernism has its place. I take a pretty constructivist, meaning-making view of the world, but I do think that there are objective truths and some ways to engage with them. Where the lines are between what is fact or belief or fiction, sure, we can have that debate, but I generally do think that the line exists, and it's up to all of us to decide where we individually draw it for ourselves. And we shouldn't let any states or corporations or any entrenched hierarchies of power that are reliant on us to maintain their status erase that. Which brings me back to Finland. With all of this in mind, I began to wonder if the Finland doesn't exist joke has lost some of its funniness. Especially after I read this poignant comment from Reddit user The House on the Left. I know it's all lighthearted. After all, Finland doesn't exist sounds equally as absurd as birds don't exist. But not everyone will be aware of the context of your joke. And when you train yourself to repeat the same phrase in a knee-jerk reaction to any mention of a word, then it can become a thought-terminating cliché. I'm sure you've all heard about Putin's justification for his war of aggression on Ukraine. Not a real country, historically a part of Russia, invented by Lenin in 1917. These are all points which equally apply to Finland. In 2022, it's Ukraine. In 2028, it could be Finland. Or it could be Sweden, Moldova, Azerbaijan, or anyone else who seems like an easy target for Putin's insatiable imperialist hunger. Vladimir Medinsky, one of Russia's officials negotiating with Ukraine as we speak, has previously called Finland an inseparable part of the Russian world. It's worth remembering that Finland, as most of the world knows it today, didn't really exist until the beginning of the 20th century. From around the Middle Ages until the early 1800s, it was actually part of the Kingdom of Sweden. In 1809, it was annexed by Russia, following a period of the Napoleonic Wars, becoming the semi-autonomous Grand Duchy of Finland. Finally, following the Russian Revolution at the start of the 20th century, Finland finally achieved its modern form of independence for the first time. But that didn't stop the Soviet Union from attempting to re-annex it again in 1939, prompting the Winter War and subsequent continuation war in 1941. With a long shared border, a history of annexation-based conflict, and tense modern international relations, especially after Finland formally joined NATO just earlier this year, Finland has been feeling a need to be on a defensive position. And I think rightfully so. And even beyond Finland, it is a well-worn tactic of irredentist empires to discredit the validity of states they see as belonging to a different, true nation. There are even a small number of Finns that have loudly claimed the invalidity of neighboring countries like Estonia, calling them spreaders of Nazi myths, which is, as you may have noticed, the same justification that Putin has used to justify the invasion of Ukraine. So it probably shouldn't surprise you that these people are widely regarded as explicit mouthpieces of the Putin regime. Sure, there might not be a significant push to validate the idea that the physical landmass of Finland does not exist. But I can absolutely see a world where Putin uses the history of Finland's semi-autonomy as a part of Russia as leverage for some sort of power grab. And I can see how getting people to doubt the validity or even the viability of a true independent Finland could help him in that. And so, my hat's off to the mods of r/Finland conspiracy. I, for one, am all for the disarming use of satire and humor, uncouth as it is, to disrupt hierarchies of power. But sometimes, you should call a joke, and sometimes it's best not to joke, especially when you've lost control of the joke. In a great article from Studies in American Humor, Rebecca Crefting writes, "Despite satire offering powerful critiques, some issues cannot withstand the risk of being framed as humorous. Misinterpretation has too high a cost. Lest we forget, there is a war going on, and long after all the flags and banners have been taken down and the conflict fades to the background, there are still people who have lost their homes, livelihoods, and loved ones to the imperialist dreams of a dangerous and powerful autocrat. And that's one thing you should know is true." Thank you so much again for watching, everybody. If you want to do something really helpful and concrete in regards to the war in Ukraine, I have links to Vostok SOS, the Ukrainian Red Cross, and more, all in the description box below this video. So I highly encourage you to give to organizations that will get money and support into the hands of people who need it most directly. I've been really thankful for all of the support and well wishes that my previous videos have garnered, and so I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this one as well. If this is something that interests you and you want to read more about it, the book that got me really thinking about it the most was a book recommended to me by my wife, which is Nothing is True and Everything is Possible by Peter Pomerantsev. He is a journalist who has written for numerous outlets and now works with the London School of Economics and a media company called Coda and several other things. And it's about his time working as a reality TV producer in Russia in the beginning of the 2000s. So really interesting insights, great narratives, and it's just so cool. He also has written a follow-up book specifically about Russian media called This Is Not Propaganda that I have not had a chance to read yet. But a lot of work cited in this video is informed by his coverage and people that are working with him. So check out Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, or This Is Not Propaganda by Peter Pomerantsev, if that's something that you'd be curious about. If there's anything else you want to hear me talk about, any comments you have, or any questions you might have, feel free to comment down below and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as I can. Also, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all of the stuff that everybody asks you to do all the time, because it really does help get this video to be seen by more and more people, and it allows me to make more of them more quickly. And so I would really appreciate it, because this is something that's been a ton of fun for me and I've learned a whole lot, and it's something I really want to keep doing. So once again, thank you very much, and I will see you very soon in another video. Moikka!